Hi, it's Miriam Berlin from Accepted.com, and I want to welcome you all today to the Accepted Positioning System webinar given by Linda Abraham, where you'll learn not only how to choose the best MBA program for you, but also how to position yourself so that those schools will want to accept you. Now, Linda's actually been hard at work with her own MBA Admissions book that's soon to be released, but she'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And before we begin, I just want to point out two features that we'll be using during the webinar. The first one is your question window. It's located on your dashboard. Your dashboard is on the top right side of your screen, and at the bottom of that is a box. There's a place that you can enter questions. We have set aside some time for a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so if you have any questions during the webinar, you can feel free to enter them at any time, and we'll do our best to get to all the questions submitted at the end at the Q&A time. The second feature is on the top left side of your dashboard. There's a button with a little hand and a blue circle with a green arrow. That's how you raise your hand. So at some point during the webinar, Linda might ask for a show of hands. And if you want to raise your hand, you just click on that button. If you've minimized the window, you may need to click on the small blue-green arrow on the top right to expand it so you can see your dashboard. And of course, don't miss out. At the end of the webinar, Linda will be presenting an exclusive offer for webinar participants only. So make sure you're there. And now introducing our newest webinar, Accepted Positioning System with Linda Abraham.
Hello. Thank you very much, Miriam, for the introduction. Thank you all who are attending. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here. After 15 years of writing hundreds of blog posts and articles in MBA admissions and drafting thousands of responses to applicant questions on various message boards and discussion forums, I decided this past winter that it was time for me to write a book with my good friend and colleague, Judy Gruen. We both have been working hard on the book this winter, spring, and summer, and it should be out this fall. The book, titled MBA Admissions for Smarties, a no-nonsense guide to acceptance at top business schools, presented me with an opportunity to step back from the short, focused kinds of pieces I had been writing, from the tips and the individual questions and the specific situations, and provide an overview of what I feel is the best way to apply to business school. It's my approach and my outlook on the MBA admissions process. This webinar reflects the main points in the first third of the book, which deals with the foundation of a successful application, a smart application strategy. Now, I've boiled it down to a four-step process, and that four-step process is going to be the main parts of today's webinar. But before we go to that four-step process, I want to ask all of you a question. Actually, before we go to the question, I want to ask you for your opinion on something. I want to run a poll. So the first question for you is, what is currently the most important factor to you in choosing a MBA program to apply to? And the poll should appear on your screens in just a minute, and I would like you to select the option that is most relevant to you. Again, the question is, what is currently the most important factor in choosing a program? What is the most important factor for you in choosing the MBA programs that you want to apply to? So if you could all vote, I would really appreciate it. We're going to take a few seconds for this. 48% have voted. If a few more of you could just tell me what you think is most important in deciding where to apply. A few more, come on. I don't want to do all the work this morning. Let's get a few more, 61%. A few more, please vote. And then I'm going to give you another 5 seconds, and then I'm going to close it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, we have 68% of you have voted. And the results are that 10% feel location is primary, 57% feel post-MBA goals is primary, 14% believe the class profile, 19% the curriculum, and 0% believe clubs and extracurriculars. And in the end, 70% of you voted. Well, I think that I completely agree with the majority of you who felt that post-MBA goals are the single most important factor in your decision process. I feel the other factors should play a role. And as we go through the rest of the webinar, we'll discuss the relative role that those different aspects should play in the process. Now, another question for you. This is somewhat unrelated, but definitely related. If you are taking a journey, what is the one thing you must know before you make any other plans? And I'd like you to type your answers in the question window that Miriam talked about a minute ago. And the first one to give me the right answer will get a free copy of our book when it comes out. It's not out yet. It might take a couple of months to get this prize, but we will send it. Okay. All right. Samarinder got it. Where are you going? It's the destination. Exactly. Where are you going? You have to know where you're going. Until you know where you're going, how you're going to get there, which was Jonathan's suggestion, is secondary. Because how you're going to get there is going to be determined by where you are going. You can't, from Los Angeles, you can't get to, well, you can't get to anywhere you can't get to Hawaii from anywhere by car. You're going to have to take a boat or a plane. On the other hand, if you're traveling from New York City to Washington, D.C., and you didn't just have a hurricane there, you might choose between a plane, a train, a boat, a car, a bus. You have different options. The destination is critical. And for that reason, that's the same reason that most of you chose post-MBA goals as the single most important deciding factor in where to apply. And that is exactly the same. It's absolutely true in your MBA journey. The starting place for any serious decisions on your MBA journey has to be your post-MBA goal. As Stephen Covey says, if you've heard me speak on this before, begin with the end in mind. Now, with that as the basic principle for everything we're going to say going forward, let's go through that four-step process I told you about. So the first step is determine your post-MBA goal. And as I said before, begin with the end in mind. What do you want to do after you earn your degree? That's the single biggest question. Function. What function do you want to perform? What do you want to do? Do you want to do investment analysis? Do you want to do technology consulting? Do you want to be a brand manager, a product developer? Those are things that you're going to do. Please note, they are not things you're going to study. That is not the same as a post-MBA goal. So the first thing you have to look at is the function you want to perform. The second thing you have to determine is the industry you want to perform it in. So are you going to be a product brand manager in software? Are you going to be a product brand manager in financial services? Are you going to be a financial advisor for pension funds or for wealthy individuals? Are you going to be in manufacturing? And in that case, are you interested in aerospace manufacturing, consumer goods manufacturing, computer manufacturing, high-tech, mobile devices? You know, again, the industry becomes the second factor that you have to define in terms of your post-MBA goal and the direction you want to take. The third element that you have to consider is location. And as the slide says, it's a maybe. It's not going to be critical for all of you. Some of you are citizens of the world, and the world is your oyster. It's a global village out there. It's not that important to you. For others, you're going to want to be in emerging markets. That also has certain implications in terms of where you may want to go to school and obviously where you want to get your first job. For others of you, you might want to be close to home and family. So the city where your family lives is going to be very, very important. Or you might have a significant other, and the job that that person has is going to be very important, or their family, or their needs, whatever those needs may be. So sometimes location for some of you is going to be very important. For others, it's really just not going to be a major factor. Now, what do you do if your goal is fuzzy? Or what if you do if you really don't have one? Well, as you may guess from the importance I'm putting on a post-MBA goal, I would say you need to get one before you can apply. And you need to get one before you can apply for two reasons. One, that decision, that goal, while it does not have to be stuck to at all costs, and it could very easily change, and probably will change or be refined by your business school experience, and that's fine. Just like a trip or vacation plan can be changed en route, and that's fine. Both just based on your experiences as you travel or weather or circumstances beyond your control. That's all good and fine. It doesn't mean you don't have to have a destination. So that destination needs to guide you in terms of your decisions both when applying and when arriving in school. But furthermore, most top MBA programs will want to see that you have a clear direction, that you know why you're applying to business school, that you're not doing it just to get your ticket punched or just to get out of a job you hate or just because you liked school 5 or 10 years ago. So again, if your goal is fuzzy, take the time now before you apply to clarify it. Research professional options, talk to people in positions that you think you might enjoy to get more information about them, do informational interviews at companies you may be interested in working for at some point in the future. Do the research that you would do if you were going on a vacation or on any journey, because this will be probably much more of an investment than any vacation you might take. Now, the second thing you have to do, once you know where you want to go, then, as I believe Jonathan suggested, you have to figure out how to get there. And that is dependent upon the schools. Schools have different strengths. They have different approaches to management education. And you have to determine which ones will best help you achieve your goal. So look at what the schools offer. First of all, look at recruiting. Well, here's a slide showing, again, the importance of goals and goal time on your way to choosing your goals. But going back to researching schools, which schools support your goals? Which schools have the recruiters you want to work for actively recruiting on campus? Where do graduates of particular schools get jobs? Are they getting it in the function that you're most interested in, the industry that you're most interested in? And what about the curriculum? What are you going to study? And how does the school teach it? Do you prefer a rigid curriculum like at Harvard? Harvard's first year is entirely fixed. Second year, it's entirely elective. Does that appeal to you, or do you want the flexibility of Chicago? Do you want a case method school like a Darden or a Harvard? Do you want a school that heavily focuses on experiential learning like Ross, for example? Or do you want a school that mixes and matches the methodology depending upon the course being taught, which is the vast majority of school, with increasing doses of experiential learning? And then what about extracurricular activities? That seemed to be the element that most of you gave least importance to, or nobody put as primary, and I think that's appropriate. But I think it is something that you should look at when you are applying. If you want to start your own venture upon graduation, business plan competitions can be very important. If you're interested in not-for-profit, an active net impact chapter can be very, very important. If you're interested in a more narrow niche field, like let's say luxury goods marketing, the fact that some schools have active clubs devoted to that niche, like Columbia, may be something very important and attractive to you. So look into that. And finally, again, layer in personal preferences, whether they be somewhat superficial and mundane like weather, obviously more significant like job opportunities for your spouse, preferences related to student body makeup. Is it important to you if you're from a small group that there be others of your group at the school? Or are you willing to venture out and be representative of your group at that school? That's something for you to consider and weigh up. And obviously proximity to family is one other element. Now, again, the key factor for me, or the two most important factors, are recruiting opportunities and the curriculum, because the purpose of business school is to get you where you want to go. You're seeking a program that supports your goals. So again, I said it before, I'll say it again, begin with the end in mind. Achieving that professional end is the reason for the whole exercise, the entire MBA experience, and of course, that's where your focus should be. Now, business school, of course, is not just a matter of you saying, I want to go. It's also a question of who's going to accept you, and that relates to your qualifications. That's the third step in my four-step process, is evaluating your qualifications to determine which schools are likely to want you. It's kind of like dating. If you like somebody and they're not interested in you, you don't have a match. It's not going to work. And if they're interested in somebody else, well, you have the threesome that's so common on the dating scene. I'm sure you're at this point much more familiar with it than I am. But there has to be mutual interest is the bottom line. So you need to evaluate your qualifications vis-a-vis the profile of the typical student at that school. You're not going to have 100% clarity. You're not going to know for sure whether a school will accept or reject you until and unless you apply. But you don't want to sell yourself short in terms of applying to schools when you could get into quote-unquote better ones or more competitive ones. And you also don't want to come up with a big goose egg after applying to programs where your chances were just very poor. So it's important to evaluate your competitiveness. On the screen, you have the primary elements that make up academic competitiveness. These are not the only means of comparing you to your competition, but they are certainly important ones. For GMAT or GRE, you really want to be, for GRE, usually you want to be above the typical percentile that the GMAT shows for your target schools. For top business schools, that's above 80%. For GMAT, the schools have different guidelines. Some of them look at the individual score, some of them look at the overall. You basically want to be within 30 points of the overall score for that school. You want to be above the average for the school if you are from an overrepresented group, or if your GPA was low, because you need to know that you can compete academically. For grades on the U.S. GPA system, and again, these are guidelines. They are not hard and fast rules, and the school would probably shoot me if they heard these. But you want to be within 0.3 of the average GPA for that's stated for the school. And if your GMAT is low, then you want your GPA to be higher and above average. The schools will also look at extras like other degrees, certifications like the CPA, CFA, any classes you've taken since college, especially in quantitative fields if it's related fields. And finally, they will look at mitigating circumstances provided that you inform them of those mitigating circumstances. And the mitigating circumstances are there to provide context. Context for events, usually events beyond your control, usually circumstances that no longer influence your performance. They've changed. And it's important for you not so much to make excuses for what happened, but to simply provide context and explain that those circumstances are no longer affecting you today. So that's the academic pillar of your application. The next one is work experience, and you're going to be compared to your competition in terms of your work experience. And there's a quantitative element to that. For most full-time MBA programs, the sweet spot in terms of experience is 3 to 6 years. I would say, again, for most programs, not all, 2 years is an effective minimum, though not usually a stated minimum, and 8 years is pretty much a maximum, though again, there are people who are accepted with more than 8 years of experience. But more important than the quantity is the quality of work experience on the job. Because even if you're in that competitive range in terms of quantity, you also have to show that you're qualitatively competitive. That means you have to show above average growth and progression on the job. The schools will ideally want to see leadership on the job. They will want to see that you've shouldered responsibility, and they will want to see that you've been a person of impact and contribution. What is impact and contribution? That you made a difference. What person in the news this week, or this past, I think it was this week, it might have been, I think it was last week, has been in the news a lot, just on the basis of his impact and contribution. I have one person in mind exactly. Vivek, you got it. Book for you when it comes out. Miriam will be in touch and get your email address. Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is a person of outsized impact. Love him, hate him. He has made major contributions to technology, to all our lives. Outsized impact. You don't have to show that you will be the next Steve Jobs. Relax. But you do have to show that you made a difference. So that's something to keep in mind, and that will make the qualitative aspect of your work experience truly competitive. Then there's community service. Community service is another arena in which you can show a habit of leadership, which is something that Harvard explicitly wants to see. You can show, again, that you've taken initiative and responsibility. And you can also show the teamwork skills that many people, that many schools value, and many future employers value. Now, teamwork is something you can usually, it's relatively easy to show on the job. So, but sometimes it can be very difficult, especially for the younger ones of you, to show leadership or real responsibility on the job. Community service can be the place where you really show what you can do, where you can show the impact I just mentioned in connection with Steve Jobs. Finally, there's another factor, and this is another pillar of a competitive application, and it's probably the hardest one for you to assess in assessing yourself vis-a-vis competition, and that's what I call the why admit you factor. What will you add to the class? It's really hard to address since obviously you don't know your competition. It's somewhat easier to address if you're from an underrepresented minority, you come from a country that doesn't send many applicants to business school. It's harder for overrepresented groups. But the key is to talk in terms of specifics. So if you're an engineer, are you really just an engineer that kind of fits into the gray mass of engineers applying to business school? Or are you an environmental engineer? Or are you a mechanical engineer specializing in infrastructure development or something like that? Are you a financial analyst like so many financial analysts? Or are you a financial analyst specializing in healthcare and healthcare cost containment? There's so many different ways to define your jobs that will separate you from the overrepresented and put you in a smaller and smaller bucket. So your competition becomes narrower and narrower. And then there are, of course, what are your non-professional interests? Some of you are very athletic. Some of you are very musical. Some of you are very artistic. Some of you may be very politically engaged and active in all kinds of causes. Others of you may be involved in your church, mosque, synagogue. What are your non-professional interests? Be sure to include those in your application. Those can add a tremendous hue to the colorfulness of your application, and they can also, again, distinguish you from your competition. And then they're just distinctive experiences. Maybe you climbed some incredible peak. Maybe you sailed the ocean blue. Maybe you hang glide. Maybe you don't do anything quite that dramatic. Maybe you compete in cooking contests. I don't know. But there might be some personal interest and distinctive experience. It could be a hardship. I hope it's not. It could be growing up in poverty and overcoming that kind of thing. Again, I hope that you have always had easy lives. But there can be different experiences that will distinguish you, that will also tremendously show your character. Those kinds of experiences will help to distinguish you and add to the competitiveness of your profile. Okay, so we discussed the first three steps. Determine your post-MBA goal. Research the schools that can determine which are the best ones to support that goal. Evaluate your qualifications. And then you take the overlap between the schools you want to attend and the schools likely to want you. The sweet spot, the overlap between those two circles, those two universes, is your sweet spot. Those are the schools that you should consider seriously applying to. So of the schools that support your goals, where are you competitive? Again, that's the intersection of those two circles. You're going to want to end up with a list of 4 to 8 programs that support your goals. Even if you apply to fewer schools, apply more conservatively. If you want to apply to fewer schools, apply more conservatively and limit your choice to those where you are more likely to gain acceptance. If you will want to apply to schools where acceptance is less likely, in other words, you're applying to more stretch programs, your competitiveness is a little bit dicier, then you need to apply to more programs and include at least a couple where your chances of acceptance are good. However, I would never apply to a program that you wouldn't attend. That's just silliness. That's not a safety. That's just a waste of time and money. So assess your qualifications. If you come up with a situation where, hold on a second, these two circles don't intersect, then you have a few options. You need to improve your profile, and that is the subject of a different webinar, or you need to change the schools that you want to attend. And then you have to assess whether your goal is realistic for you, or whether other schools will help you achieve that goal. So again, you need to be objective and realistic sometimes, and that can be a little bit difficult. But once you have this list of 4 to 8 schools where you want to apply, you really have arrived at your perfect MBA choices. Are you finished? Obviously not. This is an interim goal, your perfect MBA choices. Applying to the appropriate programs is the route to acceptance. There's no question about that. And guided by self-knowledge, school research, and a clear understanding of your professional educational goals, choosing those right programs is the foundation of a successful MBA application. However, those perfect MBA choices, as I said a moment ago, are just an interim destination. The application journey is going to continue after you've arrived at your perfect MBA choices. It's going to travel through essay, recommendation, and interview land. And if you're lucky and do a great job in presenting yourself, you may even visit the kingdom of multiple acceptances or the land of scholarships. Now, to help you arrive at these most desirable destinations, we are offering you webinar registrants, $50 off any of our services. There's no minimum purchase required. You can use this for essay editing, interview prep, consulting, or any of our comprehensive school packages. Just enter APS 50 in the coupon box on or before September 15th. I also just want to give a brief reminder before I open up the floor to questions. I just want to ask you, just want to remind you that we are having a price increase on September 1st. So you can get the $50 off and get current prices today and tomorrow. And then afterwards, you can get the $50 off, but you will be at our new prices for 2011-2012 season. So now let's turn to your questions.
So Linda, actually, Risha asked a question.
You can pose more.
That I think is applicable to a lot of the audience, and she just wanted to clarify, were you talking about the short-term goals or the long-term goals?
Well, that's a good question. I was talking in terms of the primary guide being your short-term goal. That's, Richa, thank you very much for the question. The short-term goals have to be your primary guide, because unless you have really, really clear long-term goals are usually 5 to 10 years after your MBA. And usually the short-term goals lead to the long-term goals. So they're not disconnected. But if you don't get to that first post-MBA job, then it's less likely you're going to get to the long-term ones. Now, sometimes people think, many applicants will say, well, short-term I want to do management consulting, and long-term I want to run my own business. That's okay. In that case, I would keep a long-term goal in mind, and you might want a general management program with a strong entrepreneurial track. But the focus still has to be a really good program that's going to help you get into the management consulting firms and go from there. So that would be the focus. And again, a little bit would depend on your own experience and background. But in general, what I was talking about here was the short-term goal. Thank you for the question. Good question. Now, I also see that Samarinder asks, you say that we should look at the recruitment or recruiting, but I think most schools have similar statistics. For example, most schools have similar average pay packages and similar percentage of students getting job offers in the consulting industries. And how do we decide? That's not true. I think I agree that there is a certain amount, there could be more transparency in the job data that the schools provide, but you can see that different schools For example, Yale, I think, sends almost 50% of its graduates into financial services. Other schools, Harvard, for example, send a higher percentage into management consulting. Poets and Quants also had an excellent article, I think it was last winter, breaking down the actual firms that graduates got, where the firms where graduates got jobs for not all top MBA programs, but many MBA programs. It was a very good article. I know I linked to it from our blog and recommended it highly. And again, if you go to Poets and Quants, I'm sure it's there. So while I agree that the schools could be somewhat more transparent in some of their job data, there is information there. You can look at the industries they're going, the percentage of graduates going into specific industries. You can look, again, at the percentage going into particular geographies. And there is definitely differences among the schools. Okay, let's look at the next question. Okay, Mithun asks, what if I'm interested in healthcare and entrepreneurship? Should I still focus on one story theme? Well, I would assume that you want to start a business in the healthcare industry. So it seems like it is one story. If you're undecided, I mean, then I would see, do you want to start a business in healthcare, or do you want to study these two fields? Again, if it's something you want to study, then you don't have a goal. If it's something you want to do in a particular industry, then you have a post-MBA goal. Please don't confuse topics you're interested in with what you want to do after your MBA, because they're two different things. And that distinction is usually the difference between a very muddy, unfocused goal and a very, very solid, clear, well laid out goal. So just a caution there. I apologize for anybody's name whom I mispronounced. Aditya says, as an international student, should I be converting my percentage score to GPA? No, this is a very good question. Unless you're asked to convert it, don't convert it. The schools have very large, well-trained staffs that are quite familiar with international transcripts. And unless they ask you to convert it, don't do so. Usually, if you do convert it, you will find that your GPA drops dramatically, and you're really better off not converting it. Okay. See, do we have any other questions? Ashley asks, could you please elaborate on the GRE and the admissions process? You need to do better on the GRE than a comparable GMAT score. Well, that's a tough question. The jury is out. I suspect it varies somewhat by school. My impression is that the GMAT is still the gold standard for most MBA programs, and that certainly among many admissions people, it's still preferred. So the short answer to your question is probably yes, in terms of do you need to do better on the GRE than a comparable GMAT score. They will look primarily at the percentile score, not the hard score. And from what I understand, the top schools really want to see above 80th percentile. So that kind of begs the question of should you take the GRE or should you stick with the GMAT? I think that if you feel you cannot do well on the GMAT and you will, for whatever reason, do better on the GRE, then I would go with the GRE regardless, because a poor GMAT will definitely hurt you. If you feel you can do equally well on both, then I realize the GMAT is a little bit more expensive, but I would invest in it and I would take the GMAT. So I hope that helped Ashley. Now, Aditya has another question. And again, thank you very much for your question, Ashley. Aditya asks, I worked in recruitment for high-tech research group for 3 years, and I worked at a startup business school in corporate relations, business in corporate relations, marketing and branding. I want to transition into strategy consulting while my long-term goal is to redefine the education landscape in my country. How do I write convincingly about the transition into my short-term goal, and is it absolutely necessary to have a bridge between short-term and long-term? Well, I think you could write convincingly why you want a strategy consulting experience, because you want to have that kind of business insight before you return to your home country and re-engineer the educational system. And you can also say that you want to work in strategy consulting specifically in the education industry. So I don't think there's a lot of business in that. I think there is some. But I think you're just going to have to lay out how you plan to make that transition, because it does sound, I think we'd have to talk about it, basically is what I'm saying. I don't think I can lay it out for you without talking to you about it. And then if what you tell me makes sense, then basically it's a matter of writing it down on paper and conveying it that way. If you can make a convincing presentation verbally in a way that makes sense, you can put it on paper and present it that way, or present it in a response to an admissions question. Vivek asks, do all schools invite for interview for selection? No. Some schools, I believe Duke and Kellogg and a few others, allow you to interview without invitation as long as you do so early. Others, it's by invitation only. And frankly, the majority, it's by invitation only. Okay, Ankit asks, which schools do not see any negativity for multiple GMAT takers? Most schools don't penalize applicants for taking the GMAT multiple times. All the schools I've ever asked say that when you start getting over 3 test administrations, it just starts to look a little silly. Like, okay, you've taken this test 3 times, you've gotten up to this score, and unless you see significant improvements each time, they start to question the value of any takes. And GMAC, I think, says that the margin of error for any given test administration is, I think, 20 or 30 points. I can't remember, but something in that range. So at some point, it does start to get a little silly, and the law of diminishing returns sets in. But there's no penalty, certainly, for taking it up to 3 times. And after that, I think they start just wondering about judgment. But there's no official penalty or associated with it. Let's see. Namita asks about the ISB application. How should one treat an essay where you can write anything that you want to talk about? You already asked for 2 achievements and a short-term goal story. This is a good question. I'm not going to limit it to ISB. What about a very open-ended question? How should you treat it? You should use it as an opportunity to bring out a different aspect of your experience, your character, your background. Remember, one of the ways in which you have to be competitive, and one of the things that the school looks for, is diversity. Now, if you want to bring out something that's distinctive about you, think about some of the things you do that are different from people like you. Or not, it doesn't have to be unique. Unique is an abused word in my opinion. But there are only going to be so many people who play a particular instrument. There are only going to be so many interested people who visited certain places in the world. There are only going to be so many people who have contributed to their community in any specific way. So tell them something that is completely, I wouldn't say unrelated to your business school ambitions. Again, you want to be showing leadership. You want to be showing initiative. You want to be showing that you know how to handle responsibility. You want to be showing that you've made a difference. Think Steve Jobs. Think that old Jimmy Stewart movie, It's a Wonderful Life. Where have you made a difference? And you didn't talk about it in the other essays. This is your opportunity to show that there is a why and you factor. And that would be that open-ended question. So thank you very much, Namita, for the excellent question. Okay. Vivek asks, what is better for experience, multiple fields like industrial sales and civil engineering, or a progressive single-field career? I don't think you can say one is better than the other. The question is going to be, probably which is more closely related to your post-MBA goals, because that will definitely be better both from an admissions and a long-term employment perspective, and which has allowed you to handle more experience and exhibit more leadership. That is the better path. So the other element that you're not discussing here is what is the single field career. If you started your career in civil engineering and went into industrial sales, the second move into industrial sales is more business related, a little bit less technical, and probably would be more appreciated from a business context and a business school context. If your single career field was investment banking and you moved into private equity, that's also pretty attractive in the MBA context. And it would be impossible to say that one path was better or worse than the others. But thank you for a very good question. Let's see. Now, Nitin asks, with a GMAT score of 700 around mean value for my target colleges, can you suggest a breakup from 4 to 8 colleges for the number of colleges to be applied in round 1 and round 2, assuming dream colleges are round 1? I couldn't suggest a breakup based on the information provided. I can give you a few suggestions, and one is I would try to apply to my first choice schools round 1, so that if I hear from them early enough, I don't have to apply to the round 2 ones. I also would suggest that you look at the calendar and see what are the specific dates in round 1 when the applications are due, notification is given, and then again round 2, what are the specific dates when the applications are due and when notification is given, and make sure that just mechanically it works out for you. But I'm sorry, I can't do a better job on that question with the information provided. Samarinder asks, how important is the brand name of the company you work in? Does this affect the admission decision? The brand name that you work for, assuming, well, it does two things for you. One, blue chip companies have the most competitive hiring processes, so there's a certain credibility attached to the fact that you simply got hired by a blue chip company or a very desirable company to work for. Two, the training is well known in those companies. The typical career path is well known in those companies. So the schools will have a relatively easy time being able to determine whether you've just kind of gone along with the flow or whether you did really, really well. And they're going to be most attracted to those people who did really, really well. So there is that advantage to going to a brand or coming from a brand name as an employer. That being said, it is not true that you have to work for brand names. If you work in a small startup or a family business, then you have to educate the reader a little bit more to make it clear that your work experience is competitive, that you've handled the size deals that other MBA applicants have handled, or perhaps larger deals, or perhaps more responsibility, perhaps greater impact. Because usually when you're working for a brand name and the career path is so well defined and the training path is so rigid, there is less opportunity to assume responsibility in unusual ways than there is in the non-brand name firms. If you can show that you assumed unusual levels of responsibility, took initiative, had an unusual level of impact than the brand name, then you're actually going to be better off, perhaps, than somebody coming from a brand name firm. Deecha, thank you for your feedback on that blog post. Ankit asks, okay, really good questions. Thank you to all of you. Any specific difference in one-year programs and two-year programs apart from internship and accelerated curriculum? Those are the main differences. I would say that in general, though not always, the two-year programs are more valuable if you are trying, the more radical your career change that you're trying to make. If you are moving up within your industry, certainly within your firm, then a one-year program may be just a ticket for you, and obviously it's much less expensive. If you are trying to change function and industry through using the MBA to make that change, then you probably are going to be best off, again, I'm not talking cost, with a 2-year program because you have more opportunities for extracurricular involvement. You have obviously a much more robust internship, and you're more likely to be able to make that change. Obviously, the cost is much greater. Meyer asks, can extracurriculars offset a low GMAT? Usually not. The GMAT is used to show intellectual and academic ability. It does not measure leadership, initiative, commitment, or any of those things. Extracurricular activities show initiative, organizational skills, all kinds of wonderful character traits. They say nothing about your ability to perform in a business school context. Maybe in business, but not in business school. The GMAT is about performance in business school. So extracurriculars don't usually offset a low GMAT. The best thing to do with a low GMAT is to try and retake. If that doesn't work, then take classes, graded classes in related fields that show you are working to improve those skills. That is, doesn't work as effectively as a higher GMAT, but that is the best way to say the GMAT is not a good measure for my ability. And that's a very hard argument to make. I don't want to belittle it. Also realize that, again, the schools look at GMAT score in the context of your entire application. So while I was going through the ways in which you have to evaluate the competitiveness of your application, and on some level, the weakest element in your application is the weak link and can be the most important element, do realize that the application is looked at holistically. Okay, Jonathan asks, how important is the recruiter list given that many post-MBA jobs are not school facilitated within many programs? How important is the school facilitated to student facilitated ratio? I think that depends very much on the kind of job you're trying to get. If you're trying to get a job in sustainable development or clean tech or something like that, then those jobs probably are much more not the kind of classic recruiting route, not-for-profit. But if you're trying to get a job in management consulting or investment banking or some of the more traditional MBA career paths or corporate recruiters, then I would think the recruiter list is very, very important, and the ratio of jobs found through the Career Management Center also becomes very important. The other element that would make these numbers more or less important would be your connections in the field that you want to go into. If you have excellent connections in that field and perhaps are perfectly willing to do your own networking and use your own network, then probably the recruiter list is less important. If, on the other hand, you don't have connections in the area that you want to go into, and you're going to be relying largely on Career Management Center, then that list becomes much more important. So thank you for the excellent question. Kunal asks, how do schools look at job shifting? For example, I was in a business development role in one company, then moved to Halliburton to a field role. If I moved to another company to a similar role, how do schools look at this job shifting? I think they will look at how you explain the job shifting. If the jobs represented a certain very reasonable, legitimate exploration of different opportunities or growth opportunities for you, then that's fine. If, however, they were a result of layoffs or the jobs were really short, and they might wonder if you're job hopping. So some of that's going to depend on, as I asked it in another response to another question above, the specifics are going to make a difference, and I'm not sure I have enough information here to really respond. So anyway, those are some factors that you might want to consider. Let's see, Siddharth asks, How do I explain lack of growth in work experience? I shifted from corporate banker to not-for-profit after my MS, partly due to recession in 2008. Well, everybody knows about the recession in 2008. Everybody knows that finance was really hit, especially banking. So I think you would just have to explain why you chose non-for-profit at that point in time. Why didn't you go into corporate finance at that point in time? So you should be able to do that and explain your reasons and go from there. There's no magic. Usually the real reason is the best explanation. But again, that's something probably the specifics would be controlling. Here we have a question. I actually was just working on an article about this. From Aditya, usually the optional essay is used to address issues such as low GPA, GMAT, breaks education, layoffs, etc. Since I don't have any such concerns, is it okay to use this essay to communicate why I'm currently working out of home? It's a personal story that could shine light on self-leadership. This is an excellent question. And again, I was just working on something on that yesterday or the day before. The optional essay, much like the open-ended essay that we discussed a little bit ago, is a place for you to provide some information that's going to add to the admissions committee's knowledge of you. It is not a place to rehash information found elsewhere. Now, I can't really comment whether the topic that Aditya raised here, why you're currently working out of home, is appropriate or not, because I don't know the specifics. I can tell you that it's definitely, if the optional question is open-ended, does not ask just for explanations of weaknesses, etc., then you can use it to discuss that interest you haven't yet revealed. Again, community service, extracurricular interests, hardships overcome, whatever you feel will add to the admissions committee's knowledge of you. If it is a restrictive optional question, in other words, they just are saying, tell us about your weaknesses or tell us why we should overlook your weaknesses, then I would not necessarily address that. I can't tell from the way you phrase this if the specifics that you're asking about would fall into that category or not. Okay, Karen asked if you have already switched career paths once by getting a master's degree. Is that something you need to explain and justify? You need to connect the dots of your decisions. So again, I really don't mean to evade your question. Without knowing the specifics, I can't just, I really can't tell you how to explain or justify it. Presumably, there was a reason. You don't want to leave them wondering. You don't want to leave them thinking you're a job hopper or anything, or career or degree collector. So I think it would be wise to just briefly say why you got the master's degree you did, or how you feel the MBA now fits into your career plans, or why that was a degree you shouldn't have gotten. You can admit a mistake. Let's see. There's one more question here. We do have more time for more, so if you have more questions, I'm willing to answer more questions. We're going through them quite well. This is from Samarinder. Does the educational professional background play a role in determining the credibility of a recommender? Should we select a very senior person in the firm? Okay, listen up, folks. The most important criterion that you should use in choosing your recommenders is that the person should know you well. Obviously, the person should be a supervisor. That's a premise. But the higher up, the really, really high up person who saw you in the elevator once in the last 6 months is not a good recommender. Even if they have a really, really impressive title, don't ask that person to write your recommendation. Your immediate supervisor, who watches you day in and day out and has relied upon you for the last 18 months, that person, even though they may only be an assistant vice president or whatever, manager or whatever medium level title they have, that person is a far better recommender. In terms of the educational professional amount of work experience background, it does play a limited role in determining credibility of a recommender. But the key factor is not so much the quantity of their work experience, or even their title. The key factor would be how many people have they supervised who are MBA quality. Either they already have MBAs or they're on their way to get an MBA. How familiar are they with the U.S., or you might be applying in Europe or Asia, with the MBA marketplace? If they can say, I've been supervising MBAs for the last 3 years, or business analysts for the last 3 years, and I can say that Samarinder is the best one I ever supervised, that's far more powerful than Samarinder is the best analyst I've ever supervised. If they can say, I have supervised 35 MBA applicants over the course of the last 2 years. Again, it's not so much longevity, it's the specifics. It's saying, I've seen a lot of people who apply to business school come through, and I can tell you that compared to the others, Samarinder excels in these specific areas. So, and finally, yes, there might be a slight advantage if the recommender has an MBA, and then if even more so if the recommender has an MBA from the school that you're applying to. I wouldn't do handstands to get that, but obviously that person can talk about fit with the school with a little bit more credibility than somebody who doesn't have an MBA, or certainly somebody who has never set foot on the campus. Okay, Chenya asked, if I want to change career function, this we moved, from healthcare research to healthcare business side, will a 2-year full-time MBA be better than an EMBA? Will an EMBA do it? That is a real tough question. If you're asking me about an EMBA, I'm assuming that you're a little bit older than average or more experienced than average. All things being equal, and you're being able to attend either program, a full-time MBA probably is your best bet. There are also a couple of full-time MBAs, specifically Cornell's MBA, that is for people with advanced degrees. And if you say you're coming from healthcare research, I'm guessing that you have an advanced technical degree. And that program might be a great way for you to switch from healthcare research to the business side. However, if you are considering an EMBA, you may not have the option of a full-time 2-year program. And then the EMBA may be the best way for you to affect that change. And yes, it is possible because you are staying in the same field. It's probably a little bit harder.
Linda,
Alicia asked.
Linda,
yeah?
You're just about out of time, so I guess we could just take one more question and then we're going to wrap up.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to take this last question from Alicia. And is it must explain a career transition from working as an employee to quitting the job and working as an entrepreneur? Also, where should I explain this, given that many schools do not ask for an essay about career progression till date? It is a wise idea to explain what motivated you to quit your job and start working as an entrepreneur. Why then? Was it always something you wanted to do? Again, to connect the dots. Was it a result of a layoff and you're making lemonade out of lemons? Was it something that you saw an opportunity and just decided to go for it? There can be many ways to do so. And there can also be many ways to discuss it in terms of responding to a question where it's not a career progression question. Perhaps that's a fantastic achievement and you can discuss it as an achievement. Perhaps it's an example of initiative. Perhaps it's an example of you taking a path that's unexpected or unusual. Perhaps it started off as a failure and it's an example of recovering from failure. So again, without knowing the specifics, I can't give you a prescription for how to deal with it, but there definitely are different ways to deal with it. So with that, I want to remind you again of our offer. APS50 is the coupon code, $50 off any service purchase prior to September 15th. I want to thank you very, very much for giving me the time of day today, and thank you, Miriam, for your assistance too.
Well, thank you.
Good luck with your applications.
Thank you, Linda. This was a great webinar. We hope that now you all have a much better idea of how to find the best B-School for you in this 2012 application season. So best of luck with your applications. As you leave, please take a moment and just complete the short survey that you'll see on your exit. We really do value your feedback. And you will be able to review this webinar. Hopefully it'll be up in about a little bit later this week on our website. We'll send out an email letting you all know that it's up. So again, best of luck finding the right B school for you.